Hey guys, so welcome back. So, Squid Game, 오징어 Game, it's number one on Netflix in Korea, in the United States, and I think now around the world. Do you have to see it if you haven't seen it already? What's my take on it? And does it really represent Korean society, or is it just like an escapist fantasy? And is there any drawback from watching it? Well, we're gonna get into it. Alright, so off the bat, some Korean people have even said that they don't want to see it because it turned them off because it made them feel dirty inside. Some people actually said that they felt better about watching DP. And I know that some of you guys in the comments said that you guys were really even traumatized by watching DP. So you might want to take that into account. However, I will say that Korean people might feel a little bit more traumatized by Squid Game because it may be more closely relatable to them because they see more of a sociological map of what's going on in Korea than maybe DP would be in terms of universal bullying that maybe could really hit an international audience. I think the reason that it may not make an international audience feel as dirty inside is because of that. So I wouldn't worry about that, but you will see a little bit of a debate go on with Korean people about Squid Game that you may not see outside of Korea, and you may see that it kind of jars people. But I think that is exactly the point because it is brutal. It is fantasy, like the Hunger Games. That is the setup. 456 people go to a secret location to play a survival game for a huge cash prize that will solve their debt problems. They were pre-screened to be people who were willing to go to the ends of their limits to be able to play a game in order to win money. So psychologically, these people were pre-screened by some stunt casting that you will love. It was Kong-Yoo, and stunt casting in the industry is more than a cameo. Essentially means like you get a big star and you're like, whoa, who is this big star? Why are they in this like relatively small but very important role? And you will go nuts over Kong-Yoo in this amazing role. So it's like the Hunger Games, but it also has a very recognizable genre of like Clue meets like The Most Dangerous Game meets Maze Runner, but it's amped up on like K-drama plus like Netflix budget steroids. So this is a very beautiful, well-constructed TV series world. The production values, the acting, like everything, like technically so well done. So I think in that way, people just are drawn in. It's like kind of like a blinking like Disneyland that you just kind of want to go into. And then the structure of it is like watching a game show that changes every week. So it has all of the elements plus a drama plus a whodunit plus kind of like a mystery that you have to solve all wrapped up into one. So in like a police detective on top of that. So it has like all of these elements that don't really even kind of like get like, it's not too much. It actually works well together, and it's an ensemble cast. So this was really well done because when you think about it, actually all of these pieces could have totally gotten mixed up, but it was a very tight production. It is gruesome, so if you do not like shots and people just immediately being offed, this is not the show for you, but it does emphasize the theme of how just brutal this world has become. And not just the world of this show, but I think it's really mirroring how people are feeling about the world of this heartless economy, where it's just dog eat dog, man eat man, that's crossing a lot of these lines of where we used to have kind of social protections and perhaps a community buffer. And this is just, when it gets to this point of desperation, people are willing to do all sorts of things that are not good, and even the final sacrifice. But I think the reason why this hits the core of your stomach is that whereas the Hunger Games had these challenges that seemed way a little bit off in terms of the skill level and the expertise that you needed, it gave you a little bit of a psychological distance of that still fantasy, because you can't do those things. So you're just like, okay, well then this is a fantasy world. The games and the challenges in this world are children's games, and especially for Korean people, they are games that they actually played. This is probably why it really hits them in the gut. And so you can see yourself winning or losing these games, and these are twisted, perverted ways that they've made these games to make them like life or death situations, and with ramifications that really show your values and what you're willing to do, mainly in terms of like, are you going to betray somebody in order for you to succeed? And I think that really then allows the audience to really go into the shoes of any of these ensemble characters that you might relate to and see how you would react in that situation. So even though this is like a real fantasy type of world, it immediately kind of puts your brain into a situation of like, well, this is what I think I would do in that situation. And I think that makes people feel really, really uncomfortable. So if you really want to know my main observation about Squid Game that might be different from anybody else, is that this show is very relevant to now. It looks fresh and now. The voice is fresh and now, but I think it actually is telling us about the past, and a bit of the past of Korean people that they wanted to really cover and forget about. And it's the history of Korea post Korean War, where we're so proud of like Korea coming out of the ashes, modernizing and developing. And we are proud of that. And we do always thump our chests about it. People always ask, how did you do it? But we don't like to talk about the human toll in terms of civil society. And when you say civil society, that means how did we treat each other? And I think actually what the writer really did was expose how this Squid Game was going on for decades right in front of us. We have been playing the Squid Game every day since the end of the Korean War, in terms of the way that we have had to be brutal to each other, just like the way that we are in this game, in order to get the money to be the number one leader in the market, to crush the competitors, and if you see the carcasses of people who have been betrayed and stabbed in the back by their fellow countrymen, I see no difference than this game. And I think that is why people feel a little bit uneasy if you're a Korean person watching this show. because it shows your past. Moreover, you can tell that this show is aimed not at the current generation primarily. Of course, this show is going to be aimed at everybody, but if you look carefully at, of course, the star, Lee Jung Jae, he totally bridges that gap, but he is that old world Korean mindset that had to transition into this, post Gangnam style world, and he is the perfect vehicle for that. But if you do see his breakout role, 태양은 없다, that's very similar to the role that he plays in this TV series. You could basically imagine 태양은 없다 is the sun also rises. That character is pretty much, if you can imagine, that character is the guy that is now the age of the character in this TV show. A guy that is like a gambler, he always takes other people's money, he wants to try to make it big, and he kind of fails and screws up. Now, this is the thing that I think was very poignant about this show as well, because it is showing how there has been a wild, wild west mentality in Korea, and we have celebrated the ones who won in this kind of, I would say, a little bit of a crazy mindset. We celebrated the ones who have made the conglomerates, who have made it big with this kind of gambler's mentality, this mentality of bullying people, abusing people, and really building something with it. We sweep under the rug the people who show up in this show, the ones who weren't able to, but pretty much have a similar mindset and who are now in a very ugly predicament. So I will tell you that if you try to ask anybody officially in Korea, oh, how did you guys go from one of the poorest countries in the world to now a top 10 economic powerhouse in such a short span of time? You will always get a canned response. It's never the full story. You will never, ever get a satisfactory response. And even just, I would say 2 months ago, I heard the response that somebody from the presidential office had given to like a crowd of like European diplomats who asked the same question. And that shows you something. If they're still asking the same question over and over again, that means nobody throughout the decades has given an adequate response. Because you know why? The real response is in Squid Game. Squid Game is how, in my opinion, Korea did it. Let me break it down. Number one, Korea was willing to go into industries. Now, this is what people have told me who worked in these industries. Korea was able to go into industries that had a black mark on them at the time, and they were willing to say like, hey, if you don't want to take that industry, we'll go into it. The biggest example was the nuclear industry. So in the 1970s, I think late 60s, there were a lot of nuclear accidents around the world. It was not a good time to start a new nuclear industry because people did not have a favorable opinion about them. But then Korea was just like, hey, we'll do it. We'll take it on. We'll do it. Bring it to us. And so things like that where it was high risk and required a lot of capital investment and a lot of human capital, which also meant just kind of like Squid Game, you're just willing to throw your own people there. And if, the people kind of didn't have good consequences come, to them, it didn't matter. They were expendable. That's another thing that Korea did not want to, you're not going to say that. This is why you're not going to get the answer that you probably want. Because who wants to say that? Who wants to say that? probably the same thing about the United States. You can't say that. I mean, like, nobody asks that anymore, but, you know, if you imagine back in the 19th century or during slavery, like, how are you, you know, like, well, maybe they would have been upfront back then, but, you know, if you ask, like, oh, how did you get your agricultural industry to boom so much? You know, what if they didn't, you know, and if they didn't want to admit that it was because of slavery and it was like all this free labor, well, then you would get like, oh, well, you know, the weather might be so good in the South here, and then we have like such abundant, you know, you would get like all these sing-songy answers, but probably back then they would probably just, you know, be very upfront about, the labor situation. But in this situation here in Korea, they're not going to tell you about how they were able to go into industries that were not popular, but actually had a huge upside at the time, that were very heavily manufacturing based. And then also we had a very expendable labor pool that could not have a lot of dissent because we had a more of a dictatorship democracy. So there was a lot of ability to suppress any kind of voices that might protest. So you get those two drivers together, you can industrialize, yes. And also, if you're playing catch up, you're not innovating at that moment. You're taking blueprints from other industries and then you're just implementing. And then, of course, with our close relationship with the United States and other Western powers, that we have that access to that blueprint model, capital, and then markets. So there's your answer. You don't need to go to some sort of cocktail party with ambassadors who are still confused. But I do think the new modern statement that Squid Game is making is that this wild, wild west approach in Korea to the economy is finally over, because we can't do it anymore that way. That part of the economic cycle is gone. It's over. And this is the unfortunate overhang of the people still with this mindset. So kind of like the Lee Jung Jae character can't fit into this new sort of managerial bureaucratic phase that we've entered into with Korea 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, where now you have to manage large enterprises. You're not out there kind of going into industries and you're just kind of like being like a gambler with trying to set up, and you just show up and build something, and because there was nothing there before, it'll succeed. It has to be much more strategically planned, well capitalized, well, labored. I don't know, how do you say that? You got to put the right employees there, and you have to match it well to the market. You can't be crazy like that anymore. And so I think that is what this show is also saying, is that is over. Let's reflect and see like how these people have gotten here. Also, I think it also shows that the younger generation, they made a statement of like, yeah, these like old, children's games, they're not the children's games necessarily of the young people now. They may know some of them, but they don't know all of them. And they even made a point with the younger characters in this show. And then also they do show how the younger characters see right through the BS of a lot of these older characters, and they're not going to be pushed around and controlled the way that these older characters expect. And so I do feel like what this TV series is also trying to say, or has shown indirectly, is that the next generation is already here and is moving along, and you better catch up with them, because they're actually living in the new world, and the people who are stuck are playing this Squid Game still. And a lot of that old way of that wild, wild west depends on suckers, a lot of suckers. And this younger generation just sees through all of that BS, like I said, and they've been conned too many times already. So that business model and I'll call it a business model, even though it's basically like a con model, relies on conning people, like not paying your employees on time, like we saw with the factory workers. But even I've gone through that here in Korea, where they do not pay you on time. They keep saying, just like that factory worker. And then even while I was going through my lawsuit, the lawyer was like, gee, Sean, like, this is very disturbing because you were treated like one of these factory workers that we hear about, in their labor disputes, where they say like, we don't have the money to pay you. We don't have the money to pay you. We'll pay you like, and then it just keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And then you see like the boss has like this, fat stack of cash. And then, you saw that character just like, oh, no, and then you saw the consequences. Of course, we wish, we had that kind of karma in real life, but that was so satisfying to see. That didn't make me feel bad. It did not make me feel bad. If you know what I'm talking about, when, the boss like kind of fell over and, something happened to him. Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Or when we saw one of the other characters do a betrayal where essentially was like, oh, well, leave your essentially money with me. That whole thing. Nobody does that anymore. Like, leave something with me. People don't trust that. People do not trust that. And so there's just been way too many instances where, like, these days, like, if there is a room for you to get tricked, you'll probably get taken advantage of. So nobody trusts that. And the old people now, man, I'll just tell you anecdotally, if you, at least in Seoul, maybe not in other parts of the country, but more and more of the old people that you see on the streets have like that hardened look as if they've won a Squid Game. Like before, when I first came to Korea, you would see like very soft and gentle, like tender looking type of old people, the type of people who really were a very empathetic and kind and giving. But now you see like, wow, like these are the people that have done something. Like even though, people upstairs, like I asked them a simple question and it's like they're so jumpy as if like, you're kind of onto like, I don't know, like something's in their closet. And so it's really weird. They have like this hardened kind of like look in their eyes as if like they've done some things. And so there are a lot of reasons why you see like, even though the people upstairs seems like they're just, hitting the soju bottle every day, trying to forget. And they're always trying to say like, forget the past, forget the past, forget the past, because they obviously cannot forget what they've done. And it seems to me that they have been playing the Squid Game right in front of us for decades. You don't need to go to a remote island. You don't need to have a bazillionaire offering money for this Squid Game. This Squid Game has been going on. And I think that is why, in a nutshell, people do feel, if you are Korean, when you watch this, a little bit uncomfortable. But thank goodness it has been wrapped up in such an amazing production that it takes you along into this world and shows you such a good story, such good actors, such good stunt. And Gong Yoo is not the only stunt casting. I won't give away the other one, but I was like, oh, I this guy's voice sounds familiar. And then you're like, oh, Netflix money, man. Netflix money will even bring that kind of stunt casting. I was just like, bravo, bravo. And then they set it up where most likely we'll have a season 2. Amazing. This show, I love this show. So I think you should watch this show. But be prepared for some gut-wrenching moments. All right, guys. Let me know what you think if you did see Squid Game. And what else are you going to watch in terms of K-dramas? And what else do you think that I should watch? And let you know what I think about it. And if you have questions about like what it really does mean about Korean society. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.